to reflect on the remarks from Mr. Massé and the learnings made in Nantes. We invited 2 individuals with different perspectives on this. And first up is Mr. Anthony Zacharzewski, an international leader in democratic innovation and government reform and democratic society, a non-profit organization working for greater participation and dialogue in democracy. And I believe you are in London. Hello, London. And Mrs. Hanna Kroksson is the Secretary General at LSU, an umbrella organization for all Swedish NGOs working with youth-related issues. Hello, Hanna. I think you are... There you are. I can see you both.
Hi.
Hello. Let's start with you, Hanna. What are your reflections listening to the lessons from Nantes?
Yes, thank you. I think it's a very interesting I have so much thoughts, of course, right now, but some of them, well, I can present right now. So I am working with the youth organizations that are not only work with youth issues, but are actually also youth-driven and are built up in democratic structures. And that is, of course, coloring my reflection quite a bit. So I was thinking about the way how youth, how the organized youth could play a part in these citizens' dialogues. And I do believe that it's the best way also to build the democratic knowledge basically within youth, because youth learn by youth and youth also learn by doing stuff together, as most of us actually. So I was thinking that I think we need a bigger, I think we need to emphasize on the fact that youth today not only takes the streets and talk about climate change, but we also organize more than we have ever done. And it's important for youth to be involved in these like structured democratic structures. And that's also a way to take responsibility and a way to make sure that you get that reconnection and the right expectations that the Vice Mayor was talking about. And
But,
I also believe that...
So based on your experience, would you say that we talk too much about the youth rather than to the youth?
Yes, that is clearly my... Yeah, I totally agree with that.
And how can older people understand that we should invite youth? Because youth people are always frightening and scary and loud-mouthed.
Yeah, they could be. But I think it's important that you know that youth people actually try to organize within structures as well as challenging structures. And I don't think that you should be so afraid of that.
Anthony, what thoughts do you have that do you think can be learned from Nantes?
I think one of the key points for me that came out of that presentation is the importance of really embedding the way of working, that thinking about participation right the way across the council, right the way across the organisation. I think it's really heartening to hear that participation in Nantes is not just stored in an organisation called the participation team or the citizen engagement team. It's something that's much more about a cultural transition across the organisation. And I can absolutely see the importance of that. I suppose I would add that you need to bring along with you the other partners in the city who are helping to shape the decisions that shape the city, and make sure also that organisations like Hanna's and others are brought into that conversation too. I think it's about partnership. The council, obviously, as the democratic organisation, has to lead that, but trying to build those partnerships, increase the skills, and ensure that all those conversations face outwards, so that people just think of it as a matter of course, an everyday thing to involve citizens in some of those conversations, to share data with them, to share information. That's some of the cultural transformation that will help move that forward.
Speaking of cultural transformation, I mean, there are some... How much can we learn from other cities, given the fact that we operate within different cultural aspects? Nantes might be the Örebro of France, but what can Örebro take a page from Nantes and apply it just like that?
Well, I think it's a really interesting question. So I'm actually in Brussels rather than in London, and that's our head office. But we have a network of people working across 20 European countries. A lot of the time on city issues, a lot of the time on climate change. And one of the things that strikes me as someone who comes from a local government background in the UK is how similar even in their diversity and the different cultures and the different assumptions, how similar so many of these problems are and how similar some of the attitudes are. We have a team in Malmö, and we have done work in Copenhagen as well, and there's lots of my colleagues there are very keen to share jokes about the difference between Swedish people and Danish people, but obviously to a Brit like me, Swedish and Danish people seem quite similar, so that all of these kind of cultural differences are really felt and are really meant, and organizational cultures are different as well. But really fundamentally, some of the methods and some of the cultural markers around democracy are shared by all Europeans, and indeed shared more widely as well. So I think it's perfectly possible to use 80% of the same approaches, 80% of the same methods, 80% of the same strategies in Nantes as it is in Krakow, as it is in Milan, as it would be in Malmö or in Umeå.
Hannah, in my own research on youth engagement, as well as some of the major working movements, there's a clear pattern of movements that stand for something and want to change society in a new direction. They seem to be more successful in achieving their goals than those who are opposed to something. Or in the words of the great poet Taylor Swift on her latest album, "I'm doing good, I'm on some new shit, been saying yes instead of no." So how do we make that, because there's a lot of movement at the moment is sort of against something, how do we get people involved in the for process?
I think it's easy. I think that's I think that's human. I think that it's easier to fight when you feel like you are losing something, but I do really think that it's important that you get to strive for things that are good and happy and not so much a defense as looking forward to good stuff. And I think that the partnership here and also the partnership that enables the expectations to be fair for youth organization, local organization, that what kind of power you are given, what kind of power you are supposed to contribute with, what are your assets in different partnerships, what role do you have? And I think a lot of this also is about that you need to understand that as in Nantes, that you understand that your voice actually is important and that you can make change in your town or in your country or on EU level.
So the local municipality should spend more time on explaining how democracy works, do you think?
I think they should be more focused on telling how they have listened to their citizens and to their local organizations, and showing how they have made changes due to what people want. I think that is a way to reconnect and make it visible that you actually can make change.
And that's also your advice to politicians wanting to get, for example, Fridays for the Future as an ally in the struggle for transformation, rather than just having them protest outside the city hall?
Yes, absolutely.
I think we haven't, Anthony, we've been living in sort of a bull market for 15 years now, haven't we? I mean, and until COVID-19, a lot of us felt we were living, again, by the words of Taylor Swift, we felt we might be living in the roaring 20s, tossing pennies in the pool. So in your opinion, how will the COVID-19 pandemic and the upcoming economic crisis affect how we should be doing citizen engagement? Is that something you can see from your vantage points in Brussels, Anthony? We'll see here. I think Anthony on mute. There we are. You go in.
I think I don't entirely agree that we've been living the last 10 years like the Roaring 20s. I think there's been an enormous amount of wealth generated in some parts of the system, but a lot of people have also felt like it's a time of a lot of struggle, a lot of difficulty in finding work, a lot of really kind of some pretty bad situations in some parts of Europe and also in some groups everywhere. I'm thinking particularly here of young people and those who are entering the job market who may find themselves very asset poor by the time they reach like mid-30s and so on and so forth. So I think one of the challenges of citizen engagement in recent years has been to help people reconnect with government and with those people who are taking decisions, particularly in times when they feel stressed and overworked and like those institutions are very far away from them. I think the COVID crisis is less a big transformation in itself than a push forward on some of the trends that were happening already. And in particular, I think things like localization, people like not traveling so far for work, people being more rooted in their communities. could be one of the starting points for a different sort of citizen engagement. I also think it's been a shock to the governing systems, to the institutions, and both financial, governmental, and other that are shaping the world. It's pushing them into a very different sort of conversation about what's the role of the state, what's the role of society in bringing some of these conversations together. Conversations, things like universal basic income, things like 55% carbon reductions announced by President von der Leyen in her speech this morning. These things, which were ambitious policies a few years ago, seem now to be much more in the mainstream. And I think we will see that in politics as well, that the opening up that's been seen in recent years, the move towards more open, more participative, more collaborative governance will continue. But I think also the threats to it will continue to rise, because in a time of financial stress, in a time when people may be out of work, when societies may be in real economic difficulties, the appeal of simple solutions that involve blaming the other rather than complex solutions that involve getting stuck in yourself and making things better, it's always going to be easier to blame than to change. And I think we need to be working very hard to make sure that as we develop our ideas, as we develop our thinking on new green economies, positive stories about citizen engagement and bringing people together, we're aware that in every chess game the other side moves as well.
Hannah, how do you think, what in your opinion, how can we make sure we engage those who cannot afford to live sustainable today? As I said, there's more of a financial restraint on lots of people, and especially in the youth sector. Those who were on their way to go into the job market or had their first job and has now been kicked out. How do we make sure we engage those people in that transformation for more sustainable cities?
But I really do believe that part of doing that needs to be done by working and supporting the democratic organizations that are on the ground floor, that are involving these people in and making them feel like they are part of the society in different ways. It could be about the parks, but it could also be about other big things in your town or in your country. And I think that especially now that the social distance make it so much harder for us to mobilize and organize and meet, I think it's very important that we use what we can on the digital tools. But I don't think that I think it's a big help if we use the democratic organizations, because people recognize themselves in each other. And I think that the democratic organizations also provide some kind of support for the system and for the politicians, and make sure that we can help each other out, that it's a true partnership. I think that it's one key.
Thank you so much for sharing, Anthony Zacharzewski, Democratic Society, and Hannah Kroksson, Secretary General at the LSU.